Senator Ron Johnson in the US has been in the news, focused on the fact that he is pushing for a new ICD code, International Classification of Disease, for COVID vaccine injuries. Now, there has been some pushback against it, and if you hadn't been up to date, the vaccine group that was going to look at this was dismantled earlier in the year before they could actually try and bring this into the forefront. So there is quite a lot going on in the background. And the reality is that it does have some legal ramifications. And this is probably why there is such resistance to it. Let's first listen to what Ron Johnson, the US Senator, said just today with regards to what is happening.
Right now, HHS has to admit they have to fess up to those lies told. I appreciate Bobby Kennedy. I mean, it was his commitment to radical transparency that allowed my staff to find these needles in the haystack, to find and prove what Peter Marks and senior FDA officials did under the Biden administration. HHS has to give an ICD code for these injection injuries. These people are in despair. They've been fighting for 5 years to be seen, heard, and believed so they get treatment. HHS still doesn't acknowledge it. They must. They need these ICD codes. We need to do right by these people who are injured by lies told by the Biden administration officials.
Now, you can see this is quite political. And this is part of the problem, is that when politics gets mixed into it, it can really make people do unusual things. Because the simple reality is, if people are injured, we should not only want to know that they're injured, and sometimes there may be compensation, but the more important scientific question is, what exactly is the mechanism of injury? And how does that mechanism play out into understanding not just COVID, but other diseases? If we're not willing to do that kind of research, it does indicate that we are unlikely to make much progress forward. And I've thought of an analogy. Many, many years ago, well, maybe about 30 years ago, there was this challenge with H. pylori. And for those people who don't quite know what H. pylori is, this is a bacteria that sits in the stomach, and this bacteria is able to cause stomach ulcers. But the Australian doctor who first identified it had to fight. He almost had to get himself sick in order to prove that this was one of the major causes of ulcers, and it could be treated with antibiotics, which is why many people, once they're found to have H. pylori, they have a course of antibiotics, and it significantly reduces their risk of getting an ulcer. And so this is an example of what can happen when you have a good understanding of a disease. It opens other doors and it creates opportunities to get people better. At the moment, I think that there are about 3 categories of people when it comes to COVID vaccines and vaccine injury. The first category know they're injured, and they're the ones who are the loudest. And in a sense, they are the smallest group, because very often they've had the injury in very close temporal association to being vaccinated with no other medical issue, and they know they are vaccine injured. And they are making a lot of noise. They're the ones who got censored on social media. You have a much bigger category who are wondering if they are vaccine injured, because they are hearing about these people who are vaccine injured, and they are thinking, gosh, I had something very similar to what was happening, and I'm still not right. Could I be vaccine injured? Then this group is huge. They oftentimes are not so well, or they are not quite right. They think they're okay. They're having unusual health patterns, but they have no connection with the possibility that this could be a vaccine injury. Now, that group is quite large, and very often, clinically, it's almost, I don't think there's a point in telling them that this could be a vaccine injury, because very often they're not open to the idea. And this is why the research needs to be done. Because at the moment, if you said, oh, this could be a vaccine injury, you don't have any evidence for it, you have no structure. But in the context of the research, what would then happen is that hopefully you would have some kind of test you could use to say, well, actually, based on these results, we think that your condition could have been related to a vaccine injury. And now, as I said, there's a reason why there is so much anxiety around this, because straight away, one of the groups that is interested in this are the lawyers. And so very early on, this is Bloomberg law, CDC to weigh adding COVID vaccine injury to medical codes. But as soon as this happens, you do open a door for the legal profession to get in and then take advantage of the situation that this is something that needs to be addressed legally. Now, as much as I understand the concern in industry about something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you therefore don't do anything about it. On the other side, there are some people who are not necessarily focused on the legal part, but still don't want the codes to come into being. And this is a response from Alliance. And Alliance is it's an aging research group that's publicly funded. And they don't want the CDC to add this ICD code for adverse effects of COVID vaccines. And their reason is not necessarily bad in the sense that this is wrong. You have to look at their reasoning here. And I've got this download for what they had said. This was in May 2026. And what they are saying is that they think that if you put adverse effects of COVID vaccines, you are automatically skewing the thinking for people to assume that COVID vaccines are causing harm. And they are pointing out that, one, it's an unreliable diagnosis of exclusion, because you cannot specifically say that COVID vaccine caused the harm, and you therefore are going into a quagmire of trying to make a link that may not be necessarily easy to prove. Additionally, they point out that they already have a structure to capture vaccine-related adverse events. And that coding could be used if it was quite clear that there was a link to the COVID vaccines. You could use this coding that is already there for any vaccine to therefore do that. The pushback against it will be that it is far more prevalent, and so therefore it could get its own code that would help people to understand what is going on. This is a bit of a mess. My point is that without an understanding and without proper research and focus, there are many people who will suffer for very long times without any solutions. And when I had looked at some of the comments, because the comments from the ex-post that had shown the video, those comments were very, very instructive in terms of what it is people were thinking and seeing that caused them to look carefully at what was going on. And I think that this is the split that exists at the moment in terms of the viewpoint of the public that really is making it quite difficult for this to be addressed. I'm just quickly taking a look at some of the points that are in the discussion here. So thank you very much for you guys who are with me live. Oh, yes, this is a good point. I have zero confidence that anything substantial comes from this theater. And this reflects much of the public's view that, listen, they're never going to do it. And this is a good point. Healthcare is healthcare and should never be political. Very true. Sometimes you have politics working from the other side, and it can cause issues as well, just as much as hiding it, making almost too much noise can be a risk as well. This is the common thread. Lost my sister-in-law. I was informed yesterday had bladder cancer, and it might just be a coincidence. And this is the example of what I'm saying is people who think this may be the link, but don't actually know for certain. And it's not going to be easy necessarily to prove this in any way. So say, for instance, for cousin-in-law with stage 4 liver cancer, jabbed. The problem is that liver cancer existed before the pandemic. It exists after. How do we know for certain that this was associated? Now, in truth, I am following this cancer space very carefully, and I do understand the perspective, and I do think this is very important. But it highlights why the research needs to be done, and needs to be done thoroughly, because until we have a framework that allows us to be able to clearly define whether or not this is an injury, we will continue to go in circles. As I close out on this, I think it's wise for some of the people who have just come to listen again to what Senator Ron Johnson is pushing for in the US. It will have implications across the rest of the world. And so let's see and hope that this actually gets through. Let's listen again to what Senator Johnson had to say.
Right now, HHS has to admit they have to fess up to those lies told. I appreciate Bobby Kennedy. I mean, it was his commitment to radical transparency that allowed my staff to find these needles in the haystack, to find and prove what Peter Marks and senior FDA officials did under the Biden administration. HHS has to give an ICD code for these injection injuries. These people are in despair. They've been fighting for 5 years to be seen, heard, and believed so they get treatment. HHS still doesn't acknowledge it. They must. They need these ICD codes. We need to do right by these people who are injured by lies told by the Biden administration officials. Right?
So as I said, yes, so he has made an important point, but again, it is still too political. We need more scientists, clinicians to get on board and just support the research that needs to be done. We need to understand why it's happening, what are the mechanisms, and critically, what can be done about it. In the process, we're likely to learn far more about how things are connected and how we can help other conditions, for instance, Lyme disease and so on, that we see through doing the research. I'll continue to keep you up to date. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.